Judy, come to this one, right?
Well, it's my honor to introduce your grandfather. Harlan is the grandfather of Oasis Center, and it's about time you've met him. He was here before I was with Oasis, and was always a board member who got us out of the million jams. He ran our capital campaign that built the shelter that you guys are in. So he saved the day on that. He saved the day many times and has amazing stories that you'll recognize where the spirit of Oasis really originates from. Because whenever we'd be in a jam, he'd get us out, but he'd do it and make us laugh so that we didn't feel the burden of it all. Not only would our history be different, but the whole city's history would be different. Harlan's dad was part of the Metro government to start the Metro government and the charter. Harlan's done that in other places too. But he wins millions of awards, and this last year the John C. Toon Award for the most dedicated attorney for the betterment of the community. He and his wife, Margaret Bem, have run so many candidate campaigns, and they win. And they're the people who fight the good fight for us. So that's one way you've impacted things. But his law firm merged with the first all-women's law firm and his wife, and then merged with the first all-African-American law firm. And these are in Nashville. And just have always been devoted to diversity and social justice. So he's perfect for Oasis Center. That's why we became who we are. And I don't know, have I left out anything? Yeah, no, how would you know? Is that what you wanted? Yeah. Oh, and I Googled him, and for some reason, I realized I don't know the half stories on Harlan, but he's given special credit on an Elvis Presley album. And I'd like to hear why.
That is another story.
Okay.
All right, most places. It's always great to give you applause before you begin. That way you don't have to worry at the end. Most places when you do history as a historian, especially an older historian, you talk in terms of prehistory. At Oasis, we talk in terms of pre-Judy. Let's begin in pre-Judy. Of course, I'm very glad to see all of these young people because this, as you know, is Nashville's newest and eternally youngest startup. It is the one agency with mankind that is not ossified. There is nowhere else on earth that has been around more than a decade and stayed young. Oasis is eternally young. That is why our executive directors get eternally old in dealing with us because that's who we are. So you are the newest generation of the newest startup in Nashville, and congratulations because the staff, including our tradition of underpaying them so they're enthusiastic, has been from the very beginning, and that's why we have the best alternative new startup agency in Nashville since 1969. Now, it is very hard. I was telling Judy, my son now teaches history, and in the modern history course, he was teaching 1960s and wanted to use me as a source. I did realize I'm a source. It's hard to explain what the 60s were really like, though. I mean, the alienation was absolute, and we hadn't had alienation. Nobody knew what it was. It's sort of like if you assumed you showed up at a conservative Tea Party gathering with an Obamacare brochure. Except if you assumed that all of the people at the conservative Tea Party gathering were practically everyone in America, Nashville and Tennessee, over 30, including everyone's parents. So nobody knew what to do. I mean, it was an incredible time. Everybody under 30 had nobody to go to for advice because all the older people didn't understand us and we didn't understand ourselves either. So there were no sources of information if you were under 21 in the age of majority, later under 18 at the age of majority while all this is going on, or even if you just happened to be young, which was illegal at that point. So First of all, those of you know the Buffett song that's got the great line in it on the jazz musicians were smoking marijuana in the 60s. Marijuana had just been discovered. It was simple possession of marijuana, that is the approach, was a felony punishable by 2 to 5 in the state penitentiary. And, you know, the police thought it was drugs, you know, opium, heroin, marijuana. And so, first of all, that meant the community was totally out of touch. The police would raid a party where there were 15 young people and find one roach and charge 15 people with possession of marijuana with a felony. This obviously led to concerns because the traditional criminal lawyers, understandably, if somebody's charged with a felony, want to charge them a fee for a felony. But that didn't work. So we put together a group of kind of young lawyers to represent folks in the community and deal with these, and we were fortunate enough to, for the first 3 years, they were not able to convict anybody. But what we did, rather than charging everybody $1,500 a person, which is what a felony cost back then, we would do it like a traffic offense. If there were 15 kids there, we charge each of them $50. So, but it's still a sort of a cultural thing, and people have to live with kids, etc. We also had all of these runaways coming to Nashville, because remember, Nashville then as now attracted everyone. So we tried to have these informal gatherings, you know, where the volunteers in the community, which is what, you know, always makes Nashville work, would provide information and do all of these things. And it wasn't terribly efficient, but it kind of worked. But it didn't work. I mean, for example, we got a group of wonderful people who were willing to take in runaways, you know, very respectable, responsible people who would take in runaways so they had somewhere to live other than on the street. And Metropolitan Police immediately started charging each of those people with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. If you want something that looks really good on your resume, put contributing to the delinquency of a minor, okay? So, you know, the choice was, did you say to people, no, young ladies, you know, you're 16, you need to go on back down Jefferson Street, or go out down in Broad, or go down to the Greyhound bus station, if somebody finds you a place to live. Or do we do it? So, a group of people got together and decided to institutionalize the informal volunteer work. And telling you all this, rather than going into the detail and telling you all the other people, it sounds like I did it. It's not. I was one of a group of people doing all of these things. It just, you know, you don't want to hear me say 24 names, so I've told you now, it was all the others. All right, so remembering now that this is this time of alienation, and there were no, it's not like now where we have to decide which of all the agencies dealing with young people and crisis and counseling and suicide and there weren't any. The good news was there was no overlap in those days. And, you know, because everybody hated us if they were over 30 and had any money, and they weren't the agency. So we put together this plan for a rap house, because that sounded, you know, like rap, everybody would talk back and forth. It didn't sound too threatening. And none of us were on the board. We got the most conservative looking board you ever saw. For those of you who hadn't heard this, we did it under the Catholic diocese. I mean, okay, what's going to be more conservative than Catholic? They're going to be mad at us for the Catholic diocese, and they ain't communists, right? So how do you say it's a communist agency? We funded it through the district attorney's office. Tom Schreiber got us a law enforcement administration grant. A little hard to see how half-ounces it was, but we got that because the initial board was so conservative they had no idea what we did. They couldn't spell rap. Our original overseer was the diocese, and our original money came from the district attorney's office, who was charged with prosecuting us for what we were doing. So that was the beginning. It was primarily volunteer. We would raise a little bit of money, rent somewhere for practically nothing. Usually there was a battle between us and the roaches. We won on a fairly regular basis. And it just started doing interesting things. Now remember what's kind of going on. You've got an agency over here with a board, all of them are good people. And then you got a bunch of volunteers doing things in the name of the agency. And there really wasn't a lot of connection. For example, one of the wonderful things that started at Rap House at that point was a clinic, because doctors tended to be over 30. Younger people and doctors looked like their parents. Younger people didn't want to talk to the doctors. Doctors didn't want to talk to young people either, so it worked. But they opened this clinic that was actually staffed by a bunch of volunteers from Vanderbilt, who were for those of you who know anything about Appalachian social services, at the Sockham Group. The Sockham Group doctors actually were doing this clinic for runaway street people, young people, etc., except all the young professionals in Nashville started coming. You know, young lawyers, male, female, whatever, everybody started coming to the clinic. So we had this clinic. Well, I hadn't been on the board ever at that point, technically. So I got invited to be on the board. This is early 70s. And so I appeared at a board meeting, and there were all these wonderful people who are the kind of people that love to talk forever. And they've been talking forever, and one of the things that was coming up was this whole question of the clinic, which is a wonderful clinic. I mean, it wasn't a clinic that said you had to be young, you had to be anything. It was a clinic, right? And the group running it was actually a commune. Now, for those of you who didn't happen to enjoy the 60s, communes were wonderful things. The way a commune works is everybody talks till everybody gets so tired they leave. But they were all volunteers. They were all working for free. They were running this fabulous clinic. It was a total success. It's just you didn't want to be at their meetings. And so the question that was going back and forth was, there were two people on the board that seemed to know something were all upset because the clinic was too independent. And I say something I'm so stupid. Well, why shouldn't the clinic be independent? And the clinic, of course, that's what they wanted. They were totally happy. I was happy because I was not to go meeting to the commune. And so the clinic that became the clinic, that became the downtown clinic and all those things in another environment was started by Oasis, and we spun it off from that meeting. Well, I asked a couple of other questions because I'm assuming that this meeting is all these people that have been on board and I don't know anything. Well, it kind of turns out there's only two people there that have been on the board. Nobody else knew anything. The two people on the board, the president and the vice president, and they were wonderful, but I mean, they were really wonderful social worker people who had never run anything. We had an executive director who was a lawyer. You know, always be concerned with people who are supposedly overqualified. One of the things to do if you're ever on a board is you look at say, all right, put this on the minutes. I'm asking the executive director if all the employment tax forms, all the federal withholding forms have been filed. Have all of that ended, and a week later the president called and said, our executive director has left. He not only left, he took 2 months of our money with him. And then, surprise, surprise, what did we find? He had not gotten around to filing the employment reports, the withholding, or paying in the money. Which meant probably that the board president, who was the person technically in charge of it, owed all the money. I mean, he's just a wonderful person, right? I mean, healthy guy. So he called to see if he and his wife should get divorced to protect their assets. So we got to do something, because Judy said, we occasionally have little bumps in the road here at that house. So at that point, John O'Hara was this wonderful person who ran the IRS here. Back in those halcyon days, the head of the IRS was a major figure. You knew his name, he was real active in social services, and just they were really good people. So I went up and said, John, I'm going to tell you the story here. What we've got is all these grants that we can't transfer to anybody except to another agency like us. And you can only do that if you don't tell anybody. We've got a little bit of broken down furniture, and we've got this problem that what do we want to do? So, being a lawyer, of course, you can do all these odd things. John agreed that if I would form a new corporation, we already had Rap House Inc., and do a bill of sale where I sold all the assets from Rap House to the new entity for $50, which is probably more than they were worth, then we could have the $50 to the IRS. They would take it and close the file. And so our then president, who resigned, of course, did not have to get divorced to their assets. So I got to get down there and do the job. I got the $50, and I realized I have to have an entity. So I rush up to the Secretary of State's office and tell them, we've got to form a corporation. And they said, what's the name? And I said, off the top of my head, ESN. So for many years, the name of the agency with which you're currently affiliated was ES Inc. When asked the question of what was that standing for, we said extended services. It actually stood for eleemosynary snafus. And so we were ESN, and we were legal because we had signed everything. The IRS had closed the file. Somewhere this file closed on Rap House that before Judy, owed a bunch of money. So that's how we became ESA, being business as a rap house. Well, you know, we're doing pretty well now, except we haven't got a board. So somehow we found out that I was now the president, and we appointed a new board, and we became a board. And I said at that point, somebody at the first meeting said, well now, we don't even like this name ES Inc. And I said, that's great, there's no problem about that. We've got a bottle of whiskey, we'll give it to the person that comes up with the name that everyone, all the board and all the staff, except unanimous. You ever have to worry about that? No, right? You do think we got to get the Oasis staff to be unanimous on anything? So that wasn't a problem for a while. We were ES Inc. doing this rap house, and then we decided to do this shelter legally as opposed to illegally. And so the legal shelter, we decided, you know, Oasis sounded like a better name, right? I mean, doesn't Oasis sound sort of nice, and you can give money for an Oasis, think of a camel standing there in a desert. So we then were ES Inc. doing business rap house, Oasis house. And then it was really easy because the rap house people would never agree to Oasis name. Oasis people would never agree to rap house name, so we kept ES. For probably a decade or so, we were ES Inc. while we waited to get a minute. Now, being the board, remember this agency at that point didn't have this wonderful staff. Nearly everyone was volunteers. They either were volunteers really, or they were volunteers at what we paid them. A tradition we have continued. If you are on the board, it was a wonderful compliment to get to be on the board back then. It wasn't like now where, you know, you have to come to board meetings to be on committees. Very simple on the board. We ran out of money in bad years about the 1st of November. We ran out of money in good years about the 1st of December. So as a board member, what you got to do is to contribute to the kitty to pay the little bit we pay the staff, you know, lights, water, rent. We didn't have insurance, so that wasn't a problem. Through the end of the year, so that was one of the honors of being on there. One of the great memories I have is we were looking to hire actually a person, and we had two people. One was this incredibly qualified person, and one was this guy who was really nice and enthusiastic and young, but not nearly as qualified. And so our then director, who was also 5 or 6 other positions, said we want to hire the young enthusiastic. And I said, well, look, no, we'll call him Joe. Joe's got all his qualifications. She said, yes, Harlan, but he's got a girlfriend that can support him. He can work for us. A tradition we've continued as well. So one thing got to do on the board is every time it was a holiday, the board code, we had a hotline back then. There wasn't a crisis call center. There wasn't that, but there was a hotline. We ran. You know, it wasn't a youth hotline. You could call if you're 94. But the board, you know, nobody was trained, so a lot of the board was less trained. So the board ran the hotline every holiday so the staff could take off. And it was an interesting tradition. Think about your board, who've never done this, getting them up sitting there, all sitting around on Christmas Day, having a hotline when people are calling up and saying I didn't get the right train number or whatever, you know. But, you know, so the process is sort of going from informal, ad hoc, to formal, etc. Part of that was picking out wonderful executive directors. But remember, we at that point were the alternate agency. There was nobody else like us. I mean, we were known as an alternative agency. So what we're trying to do is get some money, right? I mean, money do help. And back then, United Way was the source of almost all the money. It's almost impossible to explain United Way in the modern world. But in the 50s, there were all these agencies out there competing for money, like right now. And what people did is got together and said, what we'll do is have a United Way, or a unity chest, as they call it, that will get the money. Everybody won't have 90 people competing for $10 each. All of the other side what to do with it. Theory was great, and it actually worked pretty well. Unlike Oasis Center, which gets eternally young, United Way unfortunately ossified into institutional arrogance and disappeared. But at that point, they were the key. So they had these panels, and you would appear as an agency before the panel, and and say, this is who we are, this is what we do, and we want money. And they would usually say, well, you get the same amount as last year, a little less, whatever. Well, we've never been that. We are the alternative agency. We show up, and okay, to do this, we've got our team. Because I always wore a tie anyways at work. But our guys all had to dress up. One of them ended up being a Baptist preacher. He looked like he was buried there. So the women in the late 60s, early 70s who were doing this sort of stuff did not necessarily dress like their grandmother. So that was our rule. We had a wonderful older woman, and her job was to look at our women, either board members or executive directory people, when we went to do the presentation to United Way, and they had to look so their grandmother would be happy going to church with them. All right. So, man, we come in, we're the alternative agency. There's nobody like us on earth. We come in, and so and they know we're communists, but at least we're communists, look like we either bury you or go to church with you. And so we start getting all this money from them. And this is just wonderful. I mean, it's real money. When you're used to having nothing, somebody hands you $50,000, that's more than your budget for the prior year. This is all really good. It got so good that they actually, at one point, decided to take them down and say, we're also funding Nashville's alternative agency. So they called and said, we've got a problem we need to talk to you about. A problem. So they said, look, we know y'all are really confidential. You do a great job of confidentiality, but we would like, in the same alternative agency, we would like to have a picture maybe of a couple of younger people. So we talked to one of our board members who had the two absolutely perfectest kids all around. It's impossible how good they were. And lo and behold, the kids said, we'd love to do this. So they dressed up to look as much like juvenile delinquents as they possibly could. And remember, you're 14 and 16, and you're so perfect that everybody hates you at school. Now you get a chance to dress up and look like a juvenile delinquent. So we actually had one of our counselors meeting them and taking pictures and all like that. So the alternative agency actually has phony clients that it worked. There also was federal funding just beginning back then. It was something called Title 20, two big Roman numerals. If anybody remembers Title 20, it makes, yes, all right. Title 20 makes modern governmental funding look really rational. Can you imagine that? So what you had to do was figure out a way to make what you were trying to do fit what was happening. Fortunately, we were given a loaned accountant who would have been running Ponzi schemes, except he was too honest. And so what he managed to do was to keep us always under Title 20 grants, no matter that we were doing the same thing, by simply renaming what we were doing. We finally got an audit from Title 20 where this person sat down with this whole thing, and finally she looked up and said, I'm sure glad you guys are on our side. So, now we don't do that anymore. Every grant does exactly what they think it's doing. Among the things we did in our changes then, we went to 1-hour board meetings. And as I was telling Tom, we started on time, and nobody had to quit talking at the end of the hour. We just all left. We had a very dedicated committee system, which was if you either expressed a concern about anything or complained about anything, you became the chair of the committee. And that's taken care of. That's how it worked, right? It was a pretty simple system. Again, now we are growing, we're institutionalizing, we're actually paying real staff to doing real things. But it's no longer this way. It is no longer this way. We ran a pretty alternative agency. So when we interviewed people for executive director or major roles, looking as serious as I could, I would say now, you realize you will be the face of this agency. You realize we are subject to all of the civil and criminal laws of this jurisdiction. Now, if you are promoted to this position where you are the face of the agency, and a question arises as to whether you're going to follow the law and report something as required by the law, or whether you're just going to make a decision on your own, which would you do? And most people would look at you and say, oh, Mr. Guy with the tie, we're going to follow the law. So we never invited him back. It operated its own way. But what was fascinating was We've now got the people out there in the field from the police force and from juvenile working with us. They are the staff, they did all these fascinating things. So one of the things we started at the board meeting, we had a 5-minute report at the beginning of each meeting on one of our programs, which the board wasn't aware of. Because being Oasis House, right, or Oasis Center as we now are, if somebody saw a problem, they just went out and cured it, got around to telling the board about it later. You know, some of y'all may know you have a college counseling service and you don't even realize you're not the school system. We also started getting press. That was really the idea of Della Hughes mentioned up there. Della was one of the most interesting hires we ever had. At that point, one of our great board members was Janet Journey. Those of you who know Janet, she's one of the great people in Nashville, fabulous people in social services, and a leader beyond a leader. She also was on our board and had always been totally dedicated to ESP. And so we're looking for an executive director. We interview all these people. We also interview this young woman named Della Hughes, who is middle management at Janet's agency. And afterwards I said, you know, I kind of like her. I'd like to interview her again. And Janet said, oh no, she's too young. She's hiding her. We didn't have another interview. We just hired Della, who went on to be the great executive director and now is the executive director of everything in the sky. But had to get ready and learn how to do these things. So she actually went out and learned to joke so she could do speeches. And the joke was something to the effect of, you know, it's a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the frog a bone. And, you know, how dedicated are you if you're the kind of person that goes and learns a joke? So you can tell a joke at the beginning of your presentation. But her idea, which was correct, and Sue Ford White, who at that time had reappeared, having been a volunteer board member and on staff, was that anytime there was a hole in a newspaper or a TV station, we were in it. So all of a sudden people started hearing about this entity, which we of course lied and said was named either Rap House or Oasis House, depending on what it was, because we could raise money both ways, because both of us were ESA, but we didn't tell anybody. What we were doing, you go rent something over there, usually in the Music Row area or somewhere, and you spend a bunch of time and energy fixing it up, and then the lease would run out and you'd have to move it. So, you know, we had the Rap House facility in 5 or 6 different places. We had a runaway center in 5 or 6 different places. You can imagine what that is, even with minimal compliance with codes. So we decided that we needed to have a building first for Rap House. And the worst tenement house on Music Road on 16th became available to buy. And back, I mean, when you say the worst, it was the worst. I mean, you couldn't even have it today. And I think it cost $75,000. That's my recollection. So Title 20, our funding source for things like that, would not allow you to pay mortgage payments or to acquire an asset. You could pay rent, but you couldn't acquire an asset. Does this make sense? Aha, it's Title 20, right? So we talked to them and said, look, all we want to do, we want to buy it, let the agency buy it, and no, you can't do that. So, okay. So I went down there and put a contract on it for my name, and we got to figure out how to do this. So we had a wonderful board at that point, you know. I'm sure your board today would be exactly like this. I called a friend of mine over at Third National Bank, and I said, look, if I can get 5 people, me plus these other 4 people, these other 4 people to sign a note, will you loan us $75,000? Well, one of the guys is head of one of the accounting firms here, and the other is a scion of one of the wealthy families and all this kind of stuff. And he said, Harlan, sure. You know, why would they do that? I said, oh, because they're on my board. So I called the first one, who was the nicest guy, you know, and I said, look, this is what we're doing. I'm signing a note. Would you mind signing? And he said, oh, sure, Harlan. So then I could call the other 3 and say, hey, the head of the top accounting firm here is signing the note. All you can do, I'll come back and sign the note. Nobody really focused on what it meant to sign the note. What it meant, of course, is they owed $75,000 if the bank asked for money. We then bought the building in the name of a limited partnership with a note signed by the 5 board members. And then we got all the free stuff, and our deal was very simple. Oasis paid us, a amount each month equal to the note payment. So technically they own it, right? The story will come back later. So they had this wonderful building over. Runway Center was a problem. I mean, because, you know, we kept having to move, and we never were big enough, and, you know, the codes kept saying, look, guys, you know, you really got to do something about this by the end of the year. Okay, it's January, maybe the end of the next year. So they decided to have a capital campaign and asked would I chair the capital campaign. These are people like Sue Ford White, who, you know, y'all may know, she runs our kids, and I was telling Tom, she used to have a lot of energy. Now she's kind of calm. Anybody knows Sue realizes this. So they decided on a capital campaign, and I said, okay, I'll chair it on one condition, that is that we either get Honey Alexander to be my co-chair, which is totally wonderful, or we won't have a co-chair because I don't have to deal with it. So Honey decided she was ready to run from Mark Goodman, so I was the chair, and I'm the most successful chair of a capital campaign in history. And let me tell you what I had to do. I had to take calls. Well, I did have to go to one training session, but then all I had to do is either show up at a mask where Sue or one of our other wonderful board members who knew everybody on earth, who was meeting with a good, close, personal family friend who couldn't wait to give her money, and I had nothing to do with it. Or I had to take calls from Sue and Carrie, the other person, Harlan, we need to make a decision. Oh, okay, what is that? We need to raise the goal for the capital campaign. Do you approve that? Yes. So the only thing I did in Nashville's most successful chairing of a capital campaign is I regularly agreed to raise the goal. I don't think I ever raised $1, but I did chair the campaign. It was totally successful to build the Runway Center. So we bought the land, we planned the Runway Center, and this wonderful contractor who was a real Nashville character agreed to build it for us. And he was totally a believer. And so first of all, he said, well, we can save a little money because we work with a lot of subs, and I can sort of ask them to donate some stuff. Well, in later years, there were a number of complaints that during that period of time, his company was shorting people on jobs or was not doing things exactly to the level he was supposed to. On the other hand, in building the center, they would call up and say, hey, y'all need an extra bathroom, or y'all need a this, or that. We'd say, well, you have not much. Well, I think we can fit it in. I am totally comfortable that your Runway Center, sitting over there, was built by a large number of Nashville persons who were contracting at that time to have something built who didn't know they were contributing. So if you see anybody around Nashville that had a building built during that period of time, just say, oh, thank you. If you tried to figure out what it cost us about 75% above what we paid for it. How you got there? We had the opening on one of the coldest days in the history of Nashville. We're all standing out there with people making speeches, you know, with your ears falling off. But we did get it open, and one of the funny sort of stories that comes out of Nashville, Bill Purcell, who at that point was majority leader and had been real active through the state and helping to get state funding, was there. And Bill, as you know, is on your board now. He was former mayor of Nashville. It was so cold that after that, he and Stuart Clifton went and had a cup of coffee, which is when Stuart first convinced him to consider running for mayor, because that's where you could have an effect in Nashville. So not only did we build the world's best runway center with everybody else's money and floorboard, that's how you got Bill Purcell as your mayor. All right, this is one of those sad stories. What away, you know, part of it is I don't believe that anyone should stay on a board too long. And we finally got to the point that we, kind of the group of us there, felt like we should bring in a new board and new people and move forward, which is good. Because otherwise, again, you get old and boring and so. So we brought in new people, and we actually had a totally new board, and I was no longer on the board. And these weren't my people, but they were nice people, and you know, we were still doing all this free work for the agency, you know, as a free lawyer, and helping them with some of these other things, or helping them draft some legislation we got passed to make marijuana no longer something to be shot for, and to allow people to do some of the things we were doing. But now remember, we've got this building that we did in the limited partnership as the fraud on Title 20 over there on 16th. Well, we had a fire, and unfortunately we had fire insurance. So we looked it all around, and one of our friends volunteered to have his fire adjuster come look at it. Major Nashville real estate person who, as he said, I will never have a fire with this guy to adjust it. So the fire adjuster came and looked at it, we talked about it, he talked to the insurance people, and, okay, we're gonna be able to either redo the building or sell it, make $1, make $10,000, $15,000. So I get a call from a person on the board. I really don't know, I kind of know my name, and I said, we need to come see you. I said, what are we talking about? No, we need to come see you. So 3 of them here in my office. They look very serious. What's all about? And they said, well, we need to present you with a board resolution. Oh, this is great. You know, they're going to say, Harlan, we want to thank you for having put together this wonderful limited partnership and all that we did. Board resolution says, the board has determined that the lease was signed by you as president and you as the general partner, and we feel the lease could be disaffirmed because we're not going to take any risks. I said, no, you don't understand. I mean, this was a fraud. We did on Title 20. You understand this, right? I mean, all we're doing is, you guys own the building. If we make a little money out of this, I'm sorry, I want you to make sure you understand. We'll file suit if necessary. I think this is the funniest thing I've heard. I really want to make sure that our board was new and independent. It's new and independent. It's going to sue me because I'm trying to give them money. And I said, no, you got to understand. I can sell the building, and we're going to have with insurance maybe $10,000 or $15,000 of profit. Our lawyer will not. So anyway, I give them a nice letter that says, you do need to understand, I'm telling you, you could make a profit on this, and at your request, we are terminating the lease, and they sent me a certified letter approving that. We made $15,000. Still one of the strangest moments on earth. So I made a contribution to Oasis. One of our other people, there were 3 of us left at that point, don't know if you know, made a contribution to Oasis. The third person was so dang mad they contributed money to somebody else. So if you ever look somewhere in the minutes, there's a resolution disaffirming the lease on our burned out building. But fortunately, we were able to buy the new building, better known as Oasis. So we got a unanimous vote to change the name to Oasis Center. Whatever the heck we now are. We continue to have these wonderful executive directors and fabulous staff. I had disappeared for a period of time other than doing volunteer work for the agency, and all of a sudden they were trying to raise money because they realized that a lot of the people, and this will come as a shock to you, who were young in the late 60s and early 70s, by the late 80s had gotten older. I had 2, it turned out. And so in trying to raise money for those people who now, rather than, they have things like, rather than the main asset being a kid or a cat, they actually have a bank account and things like that. So I reappear as the sort of face of the oath, the old Indian, the old white man killed buffalo kind of. And so then we started, as when we needed to have me reappear and tell these kind of stories, I did. We have stories we tell on camera, we have stories we tell off camera. The good news is, as long as I stay pre-Judy, no one can ever question the stories. Because as the book of Job says, only I am left to tell the tale. So congratulations on being the current staff of Nashville's newest and youngest startup alternative agency. Thanks.
Wow. I hope you did. That was why it was so much fun for me a year ago when Mark said, hey, I want to take you to lunch with this attorney up in Germantown. And so Matt Platter has never been the same for me after having lunch with Harlan and Mark up there that day. You have any questions for Harlan? You want to ask him anything? This is your shot right here.
Who hired Judy?
Della. Isn't that right?
No, actually, I was under Larry.
You were under Larry? Oh, good. Okay. Larry was that person who was the Baptist preacher person who looked like he was here to bury me. He was about 6'4", from Texas, nicest looking fellow on earth, and he wore a black suit that was so black that it was beyond black. Yeah.
Were there any historical documents, like maybe a strategic plan or something that we could archive or review?
That's a great question. I don't think I have anything. I can check. I mean, of course, almost nothing was in writing in the old days. So somewhere along the way, we decided, and this was really about it, because a lot of our staff was volunteering within older programs, et cetera. We had alcohol abuse programs, but we decided to be a youth agency. and we then had to define youth. It clearly had to be over 18, that was the majority, because we had started this alternative living program that has since grown into something wonderful, but it was because there was nothing for youth, but also there was nothing for people who turned 18. So one of our hard decisions was the decision to become a youth agent, which of course in retrospect is obvious. Another one of our really hard decisions is we had always had the hotline. And the hotline was a volunteer staff hotline for a person of any age, with any questions, with any concerns. Going back to our days, there were young people in town and young people that were disaffected. And we finally decided that was no longer what we did. For a while we made it professional, for a while we made it youth-oriented, but all these other people came and started doing those kind of things. So, there are a lot of those sorts of decisions. There are a lot of programs around Nashville today that were originally started at Rap House, DSN, Oasis, whatever, which it made sense to spin off and grow. On the other hand, there were some very good programs around town that didn't have the funding or the ability to keep going, that we sort of meshed into Oasis along with it. So a lot of the strategic, those kind of decisions, which were obvious now tough things.
Yeah, Live Hospice was actually incubated at Rap House. What are others? I can't.
Waverly Belmont.
Waverly Belmont.
Yeah. There were several. There was a homeless program we did. There was an alternative program we did. And I would think about all those things.
What would you say, we would always sort of think of ourselves as the littlest engine that could, how do you speak of the spirit? I mean, you did because we're the newest, youngest startup. But what do you think is the magic ingredient?
We have a staff that solves problems before deciding whether they can. And we have Judy. I mean, that's Anybody else? Or if anybody has a private question they don't want public, I'm glad to answer that.
Harlan, let me ask you, you still have a great deal of prominence in Nashville as a community. And I know you see the growth and the change, and this little city that we all grew up in is becoming a pretty big urban center. What do you think from your vantage point ought to be on our radar?
One of the hardest things, and another one of my lives, I shared something called Council Community Services, where our goal then was to deal with how to avoid overlapping but I think the hardest thing now is we no longer have a united way as such to gather the money and organize it. I think probably the past time to have it. The question today is how we take all of these resources and fit them together in order to provide the best package for the community. As you and I talked, there are all these wonderful people out there doing all these wonderful things, but it's very hard to fit those pieces together and figure out how that doesn't affect the funding of one or the other. But y'all know more than I do. You're out there in the field today. I mean, is overlap or lack of lap or whatever, is that the problem I think it is?
All right, you're going to have to find him on your own if you're going to do today. I will find him. I'm not worried about that. Well, let me express on behalf of the whole staff how much we appreciate you taking time to come today. And if you ever get a chance to spend some moments with Harlan by yourself, it will be some of the best time you've ever invested in your life. You will find just such an incredible human being here, not to mention this whole story of Oasis. But I think the human being is the reason he's able to tell you that story and the reason he was able to do the things, to be a part of the things that he was a part of. And, you listen to hear about all the people that are contributed to the creation of Nashville and metro government. These are really the unsung heroes that nobody really talks about. And so I know that I am really proud to be able to call him friend and to know that he is a part of what we get to all do. So pretty broad shoulders we stand on, but we really are glad you came to that.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to move into some group work and stuff. You're
I
welcome.
don't want to do any work, I'm getting out of here.
Thank you.
Thank you all. All right.
Now, you have, we're going to do for about,
Lack of lap or whatever, is that the problem I think it is?
all right, you're going to have to find him on your own if you don't get him today. I will find him, I'm not worried about that. Well, let me express on behalf of the whole staff how much we appreciate you taking time to come today. And if you ever get a chance to spend some moments with Harlan by yourself, it will be some of the best time you've ever invested in your life. You will find just such an incredible human being here, not to mention this whole story of Oasis. But I think the human being is the reason he's able to tell you that story and the reason he was able to do the things and be a part of the things that he was a part of. And you know, you listen to hear about all the people that are contributed to the creation of Nashville and Metro government. These are really the unsung heroes that nobody really talks about. And so I know that I am really proud to be able to call him friend and to know that he is a part of what we get to all do. So pretty broad shoulders we stand on, but we really are glad you came today.
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to move into some group work and stuff. You're
I
welcome.
don't want to do any work, I'm getting out of here.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank y'all. All right.
Now, you have, we're going to do for about 15 minutes a little activity. So you have on your chair a color, and that is your group color. So if you could, how did we tell them to, you want to help me with the colors, where the colors go? Do you need to get together with people who have a like color on their chair, please?
So I have this yellow one. You guys want to see it here?
There you go, thank you, group.